What do you mean that Harvard would be too ideologically favoring the Democrats? It's bull. We all know it. You know it, and I know it.
Also with Harvard, like he's pulling funding that goes to medical research, to one of the top medical research facilities in the country. And one of the demands that the government made to them is that we get to audit your courses and your professors to make sure that you have the right ideological balance. Is that not anti-free speech?
No, I think that first off, I think the U.S. government, do you think that the U.S. government, if anytime they fund something, it shouldn't be politically partisan that's skewed to favoring one side and ideology over another?
Say it again.
Do you think the government, my tax dollar is going to pay, that our government should have a right to make sure that the money that they're financing isn't politically partisan to an extreme level of one side or another?
Partisan implies like party, so sure.
Yeah.
But like when we're talking about like this professor is too liberal for me, that gets into some very dicey territory.
The problem is what we can see with all of this government funding, whether it be through not all, but a vast majority of it, when it comes to like USAID, money going to NGOs.
We should talk about Doge more. Shit.
Money going to sort of academia, money going to media outlets like NPR, etc. It's almost all universally going to left-wing ideologues. Like, for example, we saw the head of, was it PBS or NPR? I think it was the head of NPR. She testified in front of Congress the other day, and she said, there's no ideological left-wing splint to NPR. And they were like, 90 out of the 90 people that you employ are registered Democrat and donate to Democrats. And she's lying to us and the American people. It's
how many MAGA people are like applying to work at NPR?
Right? This idea that we're constantly told, like, well, no, there's no evidence. Like, what do you mean that Harvard would be too ideologically favoring the Democrats? It's bullshit. We all know it. You know it, and I know it.
Okay, so saying people are culturally progressive is different than saying they're partisan. And again, like when you bring up the NPR example, how many like blood red MAGA Republicans are applying to work with Steve Inskeep at NPR? Like there's like a correlation causation that's happening,
right?
Here,
and the causation.
How many hard right conservatives are applying to work on Harvard's campus?
The causation, right? Two things to say about this. It's causation, right? The NPR is built up over years and years and years. You can see that Jonathan Haidt, who is a left winger, who I believe at least used to be a registered Democrat, I don't know, he runs something called Heterodux Academy. He's talked about this at university. Yes, it was always like back in the day, a 60-40 liberal to conservative sort of the faculty when you saw these universities. Now we see not only is it like 96% at many of these Ivy Leagues left versus right, but the left have become far more radically left. The same is true of media outlets, right? We can see in places like NPR, we can see that it used to have somewhat of a left-wing spin that was within the realm of acceptability. Now it's radically left-wing and radically pro-Democrat. And the argument that like, oh, it's a violation of their free speech to say like, wait a minute, if we're going to force American tax dollars, which the majority of them at this point voted for the party that you're antithetical to, we have a right to ensure that that money is going for things that are beneficial to the country as a whole and not to attack the ideology of the people that are the majority of this country.
Okay, so a few things there. Again, I'll actually go a step further, specifically on college campuses. I do think that there is a cultural, progressivist, postmodernist bubble that exists on college campuses that it's probably too overbearing and there should be more ideological diversity. The way you get that, though, is not by using like holding hostage funds for like cancer research and shit again. And you mentioned USAID and how there's like maybe some wasteful spending here. I also just want to be clear that like USAID is like the #1 global funder of tuberculosis containment efforts.
It means nothing. It literally means nothing.
Okay, well, 11,000 people have died of tuberculosis since.
Do you mind me asking, like, what's an issue that's really important to you? Like, are you a member of a church? Are you a member of like a union, something like that?
I mean, I do socialist is important to me.
Okay, let's say you're in a union, just for the sake of simplicity of this argument.
I actually was in a union.
What if I said this? Like, hey, listen, U.S. government funding is going to go through USAID, and 10% of that's going to fight HIV, and 90% is going to busting up unions. And then when you say, wait a minute, I don't like that, I'd say, oh, why are you against HIV funding? That's despicable.
Can't you see the problem? Distinction that you're against the part that's going to bust up unions and you're in favor of the money?
No, because the problem is the way that this money's ran in these bureaucracies, they shift this money around all the time. For example, money that was spent that was geared for like humanitarian aid in like Thailand or something like that was actually rerouted by NGOs to create in Cuba a version of Twitter called Zunzania. right? And the
If there's
idea was
fraud going on, again,
right.
prosecute the fraud.
So
I haven't
it
seen any
has nothing to do.
prosecutions
It
or
has nothing
indictments
to
on
do with.
fraud right
It
now.
has nothing to do with prosecuting the fraud. It has everything to do that this money is being earmarked for causes that are antithetical to huge swaths of this country, what I happen to be part of. Let me
There's
ask you
stuff-
this: would you be
yeah.
perfectly fine then if we continue to fund HIV, but take every single dollar that goes to academic universities and send it to Hillsdale and Liberty, and take every single dollar that goes to media outlets and send it to Breitbart and Newsmax? Would you say that's okay
When it
as long
comes
as we're
to
still funding
educational
HIV?
institutions, no, because these colleges that we're funding are doing like some of the most cutting edge
So is
research in
Hillsdale and Liberty.
technology
They're
and
doing.
medicine.
You're
And I
saying
promise you,
Hillsdale.
like
You're saying
Hillsdale is not competing with like Harvard or UMich on like medical technology
once we
research.
start funding them for years, they may be.
No, it's also the talent pool that goes there and the network that exists there.
Maybe the talent pool will go there more if it becomes more prestigious because there's more money there.
Okay, well, we can maybe about that. I'm not against Hillsdale or anything, but when we're talking about using federal funding to try to force, and again, like what is the required ideological split? When Trump says Harvard, you need to be more ideologically diverse. Is it 50-50? Is it 60-40? Like this again just comes down
It's
to like
interesting. There's an interesting threshold.
The discretion of one man gets to determine who these colleges hire, what they're teaching. He's auditing their course curriculums. Like this is
It's an interesting threshold argument. I'll give you my answer: $0 to any university in this country. There's my solution.
Okay,
These are Marxist
like
breeding grounds.
general,
These are Marxist breeding grounds that are creating a tier of citizens that think that I and people that I value most are a blight.
The cutting edge of research.
Please let me finish. They think that people like me in rural America are a blight. They say that we cling to our guns and Bibles. I no longer want to fund the enemy. They should be forced to lose their tax dollars and live off their billion-dollar endowments that they could continue to fund. Why won't they take their endowment to fund this important cancer research? Why won't they if it's so important?
I mean, I don't know what their budgeting is. I can't tell you what they spend all their money on.
They have double-digit billions in endowments.
Okay.
So why aren't they using that for the cancer research?
I'm sure some of it is being used for the.
Okay,
I don't know what their specific endowment is being used for.
Sounds good. They'll use their endowment for
the
cancer
like,
research.
as long as they have some budget left, like no harm done.
Right. Because the money's
things are earmarked for different things. And again, it seems like you want to engineer culture through government policy.
That's exactly what the status quo was before Trump. Engineering culture through government policy and sending all this money.
Were governments preventing colleges from hiring conservatives?
No, but they were intentionally funding universities that weren't doing that.
Does this policy not have a chilling effect that would prevent Harvard from hiring progressive professors now?
Good. That's what the status quo is.
You're just saying, like, okay, it's a good thing that it's happening. Okay.
Well, I think that it should. It'll have a status quo. It'll have the policy. Hopefully, if it's accepted. By the way, I don't know that. I would have to read specifically the things I was reading on it. It was like, we want to open up your books and make sure that your admissions policies are no longer violating the Civil Rights Act and things like that.
Admissions was part of it. Part of it was also professors and curriculums of what they're teaching, which to me is a massive overstep.
I don't think so, because I think that we have the right. For example, if there were allegations that federal dollars were going to Hillsdale, which by the way they're not. Hillsdale is one of the colleges that doesn't take federal funds. But if there are allegations it was going there and part of their curriculum was white supremacy, do you think our tax dollars should go there?
I mean, what is the tax dollars funding? The white supremacy curriculum or like medical research?
Doesn't matter. The money's going to be fungible. So if we said, if Hillsdale said, listen, trust us, because we're getting hundreds of millions of dollars from the federal government, we're spending that on everything but the white supremacy stuff. But now our money, we're able to finance into the white supremacy. You'd say that's fine.
If they're funding like cutting edge cancer research, then sure, yeah, those people don't have anything to do with the curriculums.
I don't think you would think that. I think you would
the
say
medical departments are not even like in the same organization as like the school's curriculum. The people that set the curriculum administrators.
I don't think that that's. I think that even if you somehow would make that argument, I don't know you enough. I think that there would be an uproar if there was federal tax dollars that was going.
If they were going to the curriculum that's teaching white supremacy.
Again, I'm unimpressed by this argument because I understand that the money's fungible, and so we should not be rewarding. We should not be rewarding universities that are preaching hatred and training Marxists that are antithetical to my way of life. I should not be forced to fund that because, trust us, dude, that money's only going to cancer research. That's the same argument. And by the way, how would we know that's true if the government's not allowed to look into it?
They can look into it, sure.
Okay, so you have no problem with Trump saying, like, we want to look into everything that's happening in this cancer research.
Yeah, I have no problem with government audits, but Trump seems to have a problem with it because he fired all these inspectors general when he came into office who were actually identifying like $93 billion in waste.
Next question. Are you 100% positive that the money Harvard's getting is only going to cancer research?
I couldn't say it with like 100% certainty, no.
I would say that there's probably a near 100% certainty.
I actually believe $7 billion of the $9 billion goes to cancer research.
Okay, so then $2 billion is going to other stuff. What's that going to?
I wouldn't know off the top of my head. It could be other important stuff as well. Like Harvard is
Could
an
be.
elite educational institution.
Why can't, again, if this stuff's so important, they could use their wealthy endowments. They could increase tuition. It's some of the wealthiest, most privileged Americans that get to go there. They could pay a little more to go there.
If you're saying you don't want to directly fund like sources of like political speech, that's a different argument than I don't want to fund these educational institutions.
I do not want to fund institutions that are antithetical and want to destroy my way of life.
And you
I
don't
have
care
the
what
right to say, I have the
repercussions
right
that
to say
has.
that. And I hope that what Trump does, I hope that he listens to me, because I've been preaching this. All of this argument that Doge can't cut this, Doge can't do that, they're not allowed to do this. What Trump needs to do is take every dollar of funding that goes to any NGO or whatever and redirect it to Christian, culturally right-wing agendas. So, for example, if there's $100 million earmarked to fight HIV, he should send every dollar of that to Orthodox Christians that preach abstinence. That's what he should do.
Wouldn't you want to
fight
evaluate
HIV.
the efficacy of, legally speaking, you might have a point there that sure, like probably he has a discretion to choose a conservative, maybe not Christian, but culturally conservative. Sure, the executive has some discretion with certain funds.
What do you mean not Christian? The Catholic charities get all sorts of money for NGOs to bring in illegals.
Okay, sure. The point that I'm trying to make here is that when it comes to like sending the funding somewhere else, that's one thing. Doge is trying to just cut some of these funds, which directly goes against the power of the purse, no?
No. What goes against the spirit of the power of the purse is as follows, right? And if the power of the purse
like
doesn't
the Empowerment and Control Act,
if the law says something like that, or if the first off, Congress has largely abdicated their responsibility, including the power of the purse. What they instead do is pass these 1,000 pages, continuing resolutions or omnibus bills at the end of the year at the deadline, and none of them read it. Most of the money that's sent is sort of discretionary, right? So it'll say something like this: $500 million for cancer research, right? It doesn't say $500 million to this department in Harvard, right? So the problem is what happens is the funding isn't what's the big problem. The problem is the bureaucracy that gets to choose exactly how that funding is spent. That's the problem. And so, for example,
you can do audits, that's fine.
So, for example, we see that USAID funds things like the National Endowment of Democracy or Voice of America, right? You agree with that? They do that, right? Some of the things that the National Endowment of Democracy is doing is pressuring Poland to lock up their former president that was a populist. In part, the reason that they're suggesting doing that is, are you ready for this? This is from their own writings. Their reason was because those populists suggested during the pandemic mail-in voting, which would be rife with corruption. In other words, our money is going to a government institution that is saying that Poland should lock up populist right-wingers because they wanted mail-in voting. Meanwhile, back home, NGOs pressured social media companies to shut up people in this country that wanted mail-in voting or that were against mail-in voting. That's the sort of shit that I'm talking about. And when we try to revoke that and say, this is such like ridiculous, it's literally completely financing 180-degree antithetical to my interest. The argument I'm giving is, but what about HIV? What about cancer research? I'm sorry, I'm not persuaded.